with PJ Washington, he's going to Dallas, which I think was a great pickup for them. And then coming back is going to be Grant Williams, Seth Curry, a 27 first rounder from Dallas. That's top two protected. And then there's going to be two other second rounders that are going to the Mavericks as a part of this deal. So obviously, looking at this big picture and what PJ Washington can mean to Dallas, they really needed an upgrade in this department at the 4 position. Just looking what Grant Williams was giving them, it was very subpar. I think his numbers have trailed off every single month, going from October, November, December, January. His 3-point percentage is fallen off a cliff. Yes, it's a rough patch, and players can bounce back from that. But for Dallas, I mean, they were really just looking for an upgrade. I think also in the size department for them a little bit can help as well. Just overall from a defensive perspective. And looking at some of the teams they may have to face in the playoffs with some of their front lines. So I think from that perspective, grabbing him, we'll get to Gafford here in a minute, but grabbing those 2 guys on the front line, very good get for them. And honestly, PJ has some potential to be a very impactful offensive player. If you go back and look at some of his scoring numbers, I mean, he has a game this year where he scored over 40 points. Like, this guy is not a scrub. He's not a pushover in the offensive department. He can get his own. He can make some things happen in the paint. He has great size. So for the Mavericks, playing next to Luka, playing next to Kyrie, I mean, PJ is going to have an incredible shot profile. He's going to be able to have all the space in the world. And I think that for a guy like him with his scoring potential is going to be a game changer. So I'm looking for him to be very efficient. The numbers might not be anything incredible, but he's going to be a very solid player for them. So I really like this get from their perspective.
Grant Williams is the same age as PJ Washington. So it's not like you traded away a younger player for someone who's remarkably older. I think this comes down to the value of Grant Williams himself. I think he actually still does possess some value, but you need to be the right team to be able to use him. On the Celtics, part of the reason he got paid in the first place was because as a low usage defensive player, he carries a lot of value. You're not asking to beat closeouts. You're not asking to do too much with the ball in his hand. You're just asking to spot up from the corners and make threes, or spot up at the wing every once in a while. Just slide along that area from the wing to the corner and just catch the ball and shoot threes. And then defensively, he's tough. He's relatively savvy. He's not the best, but he's quick and he's agile for his size, and he's just so strong and sturdy that he gives you a little bit of that PJ Tucker effect. So he's very valuable to a contender. The problem is when the Mavericks signed him in the first place, part of what the Mavericks needed were more players like PJ Washington. Someone who, when Luka is getting doubled once he scored too many points, as often happens, and the attention draws towards him and Kyrie, you need people who can take advantage of 3-on-2s, either by making passes or by putting the ball on the deck themselves and actually creating something with those advantages. Grant Williams can't do that, and it's no surprise that he's therefore struggled with the Mavericks. PJ Washington, on the other hand, he can. You can't just leave him idly to just, he'll dribble the ball and, I don't know where he'll go. No. PJ will give you 30 if you just leave him alone like that. Yep. So I think it's valuable for the Mavericks to be able to get PJ Washington.
Avi, you're absolutely right. He just didn't. It was interesting because at the beginning of the season, I mean, he was absolutely going off because he could hit his 3-point shots, and that's why I think that's why they wanted him in the first place, because he could defend. And he could hit his 3-point shots. Once he's not hitting those 3-point shots, he really kind of falls out of the rotation. And I think that's exactly what happened. So when he gets over to the Hornets and he gets more time, either they see him. Now he's signed through, I believe, he signed an extra year, an additional year over PJ Washington. So he's signed through 26, 27. And with PJ Washington, I just agree with Avi on that. I think Grant fell out of the rotation like we were just talking about, and PJ Washington is just a better scorer. I think the biggest issue with Dallas is going to be their 1-5 defense. I think that's going to be their biggest problem, and putting it all together on both ends of the floor. So we'll see it if they can.
But the Mavericks weren't done today, guys. They made the move for PJ Washington, but they made another move. This is interesting to bolster their front line. And this kind of brings up a question that Avi and I discussed before we came on this pod here today. So the Wizards sent Daniel Gafford to Dallas in exchange for Rashawn Holmes and more draft compensation. So this brings more eyeballs to Dallas again for their front line because they just drafted Derek Lively and he's had a very productive season for them. They've gained trust in him. He displayed an ability to be a plus defender, rim protector. He's a guy that displays a little bit of an ability to be a passer, a short roll passer. And, this is stuff that Avi and I talked about before. So, I mean, if you guys are looking for a deep dive on Derek Lively, check out that podcast where we went through some rooks now have been playing this season. But this kind of brings into question, how does Derek Lively fit with this team down the stretch? Gafford is under contract for multiple years. So this isn't a rental. This isn't a guy they're just going to try out for the season and just kind of let him go. This is a real investment here. He has multiple years left on his deal, and he is a starting level center. He's been starting for Washington for multiple years. So you bring him into the fold with Lively, and now it's like, okay, who's the one, who's the two option? For now, it's probably going to be Gafford by default since Lively has been hurt. He's missing games. So Gafford slots in. He's a great 5. He can go get some lobs. There's a highlight I saw on Twitter from earlier today from a Washington game. I think it was last season where, he extended almost behind himself to grab a lob for a dunk. So, this isn't like a ground-bound center that can't go get lobs like Lively can. He can absolutely do that. He can get some boards. He can block shots occasionally. So he's a high-value center. But what happens when Lively is healthy? Do they go to Lively? Do they go to Gafford for the starting minutes? Who closes games? I mentioned this to Avi earlier as well. It might be matchup dependent. If they go against a Jokic, Embiid type player, a Giannis, a serious interior force, maybe one of those two guys gets the priority. But if it's more of a stretch big that doesn't put as much pressure on the hoop, like a Miles Turner, maybe someone else gets the nod that night. It just might depend on that. It might kind of flip between the matchups. So that's something I'm going to be keeping an eye on for the Mavericks, just in terms of the minutes distribution, because they're both very productive players, but it might just depend on the circumstance. And then for Washington, I would say that, this is a okay deal. Obviously, the draft compensation just matters more than anything.
Yeah.
So for them, I think it's kind of similar to what Charlotte did. Their season's going nowhere. They didn't see a real value in keeping, these high quality rotation players. They'd rather just kind of start over. And, now Derek, or rather Marvin Bagley gets more of a runway to minutes along with Rashawn Holmes. And Bagley has displayed some flashes when there were some games before he got hurt to where he had some double doubles. He had some of that potential that the Pistons saw in him when they traded for him. And that's a whole nother conversation that we had in the past as to why they traded for him in the first place. But nonetheless, I do like kind of freeing up minutes for Marvin Bagley, see what you got in him. Maybe he gets back to being a double-double threat, and that really changes Washington's outlook as well. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. I want to see the draft compensation. I don't know if that's come out yet, but that's definitely going to affect things from their side of the equation.
It seems like the Mavericks were able to acquire that first-round pick from the Thunder in exchange for the Thunder now having the right to swap their 2028 first with the Mavericks 2028 first if they so choose. So that's a very valuable swap right. And of course, the Mavericks were then able to use that 2024 first, which, by the way, isn't even a very high first. It's likely to be somewhere between 26 or 27. If I had to guess, just based off of the standings and the teams. It's the second least favorable of a bunch of teams, 2 of which are really successful. So it'll probably be in that range. And in this class, that's not that valuable. So, but from the Mavericks perspective, these 2 deals in concert make this roster very interesting and then make their future very interesting, which is why I'm glad that we brought them up side by side. When you look at that roster now, they have like 5 or 6 players who you could qualify as either like small ball 5s or power forwards or centers. And so it's going to be very interesting to see how they all shake out. Like Derek Jones Jr. To me is more of a power forward type. You have PJ Washington, you have Gafford, you have Kleba, you have Dwight Powell, and you have Lively. So we're already getting up there, and that doesn't even include someone like Markieff Morris or like Olivier Maxence Prosper, who are on the roster but probably won't play much for this team. But just in terms of leaning so heavily into 4s and 5s, they have a lot of those, but it makes me question a little bit more of the depth from in the small forward and shooting guard positions and the
Yeah, the
wings.
wings.
So we'll see about
Yeah.
that. And then in terms of mortgaging their future, two deals feel kind of risky. Now you're giving up a first for PJ Washington. You're potentially losing a high value first from 2028 to the Thunder, when the Thunder might still be good because, again, they are this successful despite being, by weighted age, the youngest team in the league. So their
Mhm.
2028 pick might still be good, whereas you might be out Luka, out Kyrie, and out that 2027 first. So you might be in a position where you're fully into a tank, and now they have the ability to exchange the swap rights. So this seems like the Mavericks are mortgaging everything they can to try to keep Luka and Kyrie happy now and for the next year or two, and then just like crossing their fingers and hoping they re-sign so they don't have to put up with whatever the future may hold for them.
Well, and I mean that's the thing that it's hard to say. Oh well, they might be in a complete rebuild, so they shouldn't be making these moves now. Well, if you don't make these moves now, you probably will be in a complete rebuild because Luka's going to leave, or you've just wasted these years with Luka, right? So
Yeah, you can't do that.
You gotta make moves now with the assumption that you've done enough to prove yourself to Luka, and he's going to re-sign with you. You really can't bank on or assume the fact that Luka's going to be gone and you're going to be picking at the top of the draft.
Yeah,
I hope that you wouldn't be thinking that as an organization. I see where you're coming from, though, especially with that swap right with Oklahoma City.
And I guess the reason I went there was because the players you're trading them for aren't proven commodities of being, I would say, starting level players on excellent teams.
Mm-hmm.
So you really are taking a bit of a gamble here. Gafford and PJ Washington are young, so that is something in their favor where you're hoping that they can grow with Luka over time, and you're not worried about them sharply declining in 2-3 years. So that is a plus point. But the fact that these are maybe players who I would consider more like fringe starters, maybe bench players, and you're trading first for them, valuable first potentially, that's where I start being a little bit more concerned. Because it's not like I can say for sure with confidence that in 2 years, these two players will be starters for the Mavericks. And so that makes it very risky for me.
That's a good point. And when you think of these trades in a vacuum, is it market? And I think that it is. But when you think that when you look at the overall landscape of the Mavericks, does it get them to where they need to be this year or next year? Can they still be lined up to get the player that's going to put them into competing with the Nuggets, the Thunder, if they're there, if you think they're there, the Celtics, to actually win a title? Or are they just unloading first round picks now that they're not going to get back, and they're still at that top level team that's not necessarily a title contender? Where on the other side of things in the other conference, the Knicks are doing the exact opposite of that. They know that they haven't made that move yet to become the title contender, but they're not giving up any of their first round picks to get better, right? They kept all of their first round picks somehow, but they got better at the deadline here. And so those are there. I feel like that both those teams are kind of in similar spots where they want to make one big swing for one more player, but they also want to improve at the same time while they're waiting. And it's just hard to kind of balance the two. And it's not necessarily easy, but look, I mean, PJ Washington could come in, and I love what you're talking about with all these small ball fives. You can see it as a bad thing or a good thing. I think defensively it might be a problem, and who knows what Jason Kidd has up his sleeve, but it'll be really fun to see, how it all comes together, and if it can come together and they can build a strategy around all these athletic players, and they can make it work. I mean, I think that would be really fun to see.
Avi, I think you bring up a good point with the youth of these guys they acquired, because I think the difference between what the Mavericks had to do to acquire these players, what the Knicks had to do is, the Knicks are acquiring guys that are, later on in their careers, if anything, there's going to be a decline in their games instead of an incline. So I think that affects the market value of those players, what you're going to have to give up seconds as opposed to first. If you go out there and get guys that are just coming off the rookie contracts, it's a different equation. You know, if they're 24, 23 years old, it's like, okay, we're getting high quality players that could still get better. And it works the same way in the draft. If guys have more upside, it's going to command a higher pick as opposed to guys that have a lower ceiling or, you know, are already tapped out. They're going to be, you know, they're going to drift lower in that hierarchy. So that's the kind of key difference I noticed with that. But I guess overall I am in favor of this deal for the Mavericks. There's absolutely some risk there. It can backfire depending on how the next 2 or 3 years go. But, you know, like you said, Colin, you have to shoot for it. You have to give it a shot. Luka is probably one of the best players of our generation. And, you know, you owe it to him and to your franchise to put as much help around him as possible. But the questions will remain about that wing rotation. I think we keep coming back to that. You know, how does it work out on the, you know, the 2 and the 3, you know, behind those other guys that have in their rotation, especially in the playoffs? That's going to be a question mark. Can Derek Jones hold up in a deep playoff rotation? Can Tim Hardaway Jr. hold up in that kind of environment? So it's going to come back to that. And I think that's going to be the really big question mark, and that's going to be the make or break for them. The other positions are solid, very, very good. But in the middle, there's a lot of great wings out there. You might run into Kawhi, PG, Michael Porter Jr. What's the answer there? So we're going to have to keep an eye on and see how that goes.